Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy today. Start sit wide receivers heading into week 4 of the fantasy football season. Going to talk about every single game this week, all the way from our Sunday morning out in, are we in London? I think they're in London. And then on Monday night as well. And a little bit of a change to the format. Also introducing some cards that'll include exactly start or sit on each and every player here. All 3 starting receivers for every team. So let me know if you guys are enjoying the new format. What I'll do is get into some of the numbers, the thoughts on the matchup, and then go to the players in the start sit. Everything will be timestamped to let you know each and every game to go to help you guys out. If you guys enjoy the format, if you guys enjoy this video, you get some value out of it, would love if you hit that like button for me. Make sure that I know to keep doing stuff like this for you guys. And as well, hit that subscribe button. Today's video is brought to you by The Stunt. If you guys haven't checked out The Stunt, it is basically brings together all of your favorite social media apps, puts it into one place, and it's all sports. So you get exclusive content from us, content from plenty of other creators. I love being on there to be able to look at just sports-specific content, especially the Sparks, which are basically like Reels or TikToks that you can scroll through, all sports-related content. And on there, Friday, 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern, I know you guys are watching this, and it'll be just after we finished, but I answer all of your start-sit questions about your specific team on there in a live room, 4 to 5 Eastern time on The Stunt. I'll include the link to download the app down below in the description and as well in the pinned comments. Come join us on there. Would really appreciate it if you do. Always love being able to talk with you guys and try to help you win your weeks. Let's get into these matchups. Okay, mentioned it. On Sunday morning, we've got Falcons, Jaguars. I actually have a bet in this game too. If you guys haven't checked out that video, we've been crushing it 7-2 to start the season on our bets. But Falcons, Jaguars. How I see this matchup going, I think these are 2 teams that are actually quite good against the run. I know the Jaguars are for sure. The Falcons are as well. They're I think they're 5th in EPA against the run so far to start the year. We talked about that in the running back rankings, but the Falcons have also been good against the pass, 9th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. The Jaguars, not so much. Both these teams haven't generated a ton of a pass rush. For the Jags, they're 23rd in EPA against the pass and 21st in fantasy points allowed to receivers. So I do think it's an advantageous matchup for the Falcons. And then for the Jaguars, you've got some guys that you're pretty steady wanting to start. I'm definitely not scared of the Falcons defense quite yet, even with the numbers. They haven't faced too many good, really electric offenses, other than I guess they handle the Lions pretty well, but we'll take a look here at some of these players that you want to start and sit. So what that leaves me with here is definitely Drake London. I'm pretty confident about starting this week. I like the matchup here for this team to be able to be throwing the ball. I don't love the matchup for the Falcons in terms of winning this football game, but I do think that they'll have to lean a bit more on the pass because I do think it'll be a struggle to run the football with those Jaguars when it comes to how good they've been against the run, not so good against the pass. And then on the Jaguars side of things, offensively, I'm still pretty confident in this team, and I think a guy like Calvin Ridley's kind of a matchup-proof player for me. I do think he's going to be hitting his stride here and get back on track from what we saw in week 1 as opposed to what we've seen the last couple of weeks. And I do not think Zay Jones is going to play. So for me, when you miss that kind of target in the offense, that makes me feel more comfortable playing Christian Kirk. And this isn't an offense or a defense that I'm too scared of in the Falcons quite yet. So I still feel good, not great about starting Kirk this week. Next up, Steelers, Texans. This is a matchup where I do think, the Steelers are on the road here. I think there's a Texans team that is lively to potentially win this game. Texans have been good in fantasy points allowed to receivers. They got a great coverage grade from PFF, 78.3, 3rd in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. I don't think this is completely indicative of how good of a pass defense they are, but this was the case last season, and it is again this season. So a defense that you do have to respect, but I do think this will be a game script that will be pretty neutral, or potentially the Texans leading this game that will lead to the Steelers throwing it a bit. A lot of teams run the ball quite a bit against the Texans because they've been so brutal against the run. On the flip side, the Steelers have struggled in fantasy points allowed to receivers, 28th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, but they are a pretty good unit when it comes to a great pass rush. They could give the Texans some problems. Like, they've managed to hold steady here without Laramie Tunsil. I don't know how long that can last in a really tough matchup here. And then overall, the Steelers aren't that bad against the pass, 8th in EPA. So matchup here is relatively tough, but I'll get into the specifics here in our start sit as to where we can find some advantages. So on that Texan side, like I mentioned, I do feel pretty confident playing Tank Dell off of a couple big weeks here. He has been the number 1 for this team. You might think it's Nico Collins. It hasn't been from a route running perspective. Dell's been on the field more than Collins has. He's kind of been he's taken more targets and receptions the last 2 weeks since he's been on the field. I think he's someone you can confidently play. The Steelers have really struggled against outside receivers. Amari Cooper, Who are their three games? Amari Cooper, Brandon Ayuk, and then last week, Devontae Adams. The guys running their routes on the outside, they've struggled. That's what Dell is running the majority of his routes from, or where he's running the majority of his routes from. So I'm pretty confident in playing him. Nico Collins, I'm not as confident because I do think the Steelers' defense is pretty good, and Robert Woods is someone I want to sit. Also, on the other side with the Steelers, I mentioned the Texans defense. Still going to go with George Pickens. He's capable of creating explosive plays. As long as Deontay Johnson's out, there's very few matchups where I wouldn't play Pickens because I do think he's a guy that can give you a massive week, and he's been finding ways with some explosive plays to be relevant for you, even in some of his down weeks like we saw last week. I think he had 4 receptions for 75 yards. That is still good enough for a lot of people's fantasy leagues. Otherwise, though, with the Steelers, not many guys you want to be starting. Moving to Rams, Colts. This is a Colts team that I do like being able to attack some of these receivers. The Colts are 25th right now, or 23rd, in fantasy points allowed, 2 wide receivers. Pretty brutal coverage grade. You lose a guy like Stephon Gilmore, and you can tell the pass defense has taken a step back, but the run defense is still really good. So if teams want to move the ball, they do have to throw it. On the Rams side of things, they're more of that middle-of-the-road defense. Definitely one I'm not too scared of. Like, their coverage grade is the worst in the league, 40.4. So I do think this is a team that across the board isn't great defensively. So nothing to be too scared of with this Rams team. So what we will be doing here is looking at the Rams first. Puka Nacua, Tutu Atwell, 2 guys that have been dominating target share for this team. I'm pretty confident starting both of them. I know Atwell had a bit more of a down game. Nacua still managed to be a pretty solid start for you. These are 2 guys I'm definitely starting against this Colts team where I do think that they'll need to throw the ball quite a bit. Van Jefferson, I would need like a really, really plus matchup to consider playing him. And the Colts are kind of plus, but not like a, Chargers, Broncos type of deal. So Van Jefferson's not one to really to consider quite yet. Michael Pittman, definite start for me. Like I mentioned, the Rams are a defense I'm not worried about. Pittman's demanding target share, both with Gardner Minshew and Anthony Richardson. So definitely someone confident to be playing. Josh Downs and Alec Pierce. This is more like 16-team league type of decision if you had these guys. Downs is starting to become a little bit more intriguing as a stash play, but definitely not in that category quite yet. Vikings, Panthers. The Panthers have been excellent defensively against the pass, not so much against the run. I think the Vikings will look to run the football in this game. The Panthers, 5th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, been generating a pretty decent pass rush as well, but not someone that you want to throw the football on too much. So I do think the Vikings will get into with these start-sit are a team to maybe consider sitting one of these guys. On the Vikings side of things, defensively, we know how they've been against the pass. Absolutely brutal. I do think that this is a Panthers team that will be able to move the football through the air, but they blitz a ton. So creating explosive plays, I think, is really limited to those really good pass protections and those really good quarterbacks. I don't think the Panthers have either of those things, so I'm not necessarily playing everyone, but again, the Vikings 31st in fantasy points allowed, 29th in passing EPA, have not been good enough defensively. So what I'll be looking to do here is go to Justin Jefferson, of course, as always. I'm going to be sitting Jordan Addison, though. I do think this Panthers defense is legitimate when it comes to stopping the pass, so I'm going to be looking to sit him this week, as I think the Vikings lean a little bit more on the ground game. They've been trailing in every game they played, so they've been leaning quite a bit on the pass. Kirk Cousins leads the league in passing yards. I don't think we see as big of a passing game from him this week. The Panthers side, like I mentioned, I do think Adam Thielen will continue to see that volume even if Bryce Young is starting because of that blitz-heavy defense from the Vikings. Going to have to get the ball out quickly. Thielen is one of those guys in those shorter areas of the field, a guy over the middle to quickly get the ball too, so very confident there. Otherwise, I don't know if Jonathan Mingo will play with his concussion. And then DJ Chark and Terrace Marshall are a little bit too inconsistent for me. Chark is a big play guy, which he could see in this game, but I'm not willing to take the dive on him this week. Bucks, Saints. Big thing here, Marshawn Lattimore, Mike Evans, a potential chain snatching, another ejection type of game between these two. That will be fun to watch. These offenses, though, little concerned about. Definitely on the Saints side, like I'm a little bit skeptical with the potential of Jameis Winston starting this week. The Bucks have been a team that have been pretty poor against the pass, though. 25th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Coverage grade isn't great. So it is one that you don't have to be too worried about throwing the football against. I do think it's a pretty solid unit. I think the reason for the fantasy points allowed is really just they're a solid run defense, so teams will need to move the ball through the air. On the other side with the Saints, been pretty good pass defense. Their pass rush has been really solid. Carl Granderson's having a really solid start to the year as well. So something to pay attention to, especially for a Bucs team that struggles quite a bit on the offensive line. 6th in EPA against the pass too, the Saints are. So this is a game that I do think will be a little bit more defensive minded. So with that in mind, be going Mike Evans is a guy I'm still going to start. Seems to be a reliable target for Baker Mayfield. I'm going to keep starting him until I'm proven otherwise at this point. But Chris Godwin, more of a guy I'm looking to sit. He's just someone that's where he runs his routes can't create explosive plays, and against a tough pass defense, he's not someone to score touchdowns too often either. I need a game with volume, passing volume, and I'm not sure we get that from the Bucs here, so I'm going to be leaning more towards sitting him there. And then the Saints side, Chris Olave is a weekly start, but in this matchup against the Bucs, I do think that Michael Thomas is a sit just because of the Jameis Winston factor. I just don't know where Jameis Winston's game is at right now. Didn't look great last week coming in for Carr, so I'm going to have to wait and see on starting either Michael Thomas or Rashid Shaheed. Commanders, Eagles. What are we doing here with this Commanders offense? One that's kind of frustrated me a little bit to start the year. We've got a matchup with the Eagles where they have a great run defense, one of the best in the league now that they have, Jordan Davis up there in that front. Same with Jalen Carter. So now teams are throwing the football a bunch, and you can see it in the fantasy points allowed. 26th in fantasy points allowed are the Eagles. So definitely a matchup we lean more on the pass game. I think they're going to struggle to run the football, so some potential there just if they can pass protect well. The Eagles side of things, Commanders very similar. They got a great pass rush, but can definitely be neutralized by the Eagles. The Commanders right now, 24th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. I think they got a solid run defense, so I do think that is indicative here of some of their remarks here against the pass. So what I'll be doing here is looking to start Terry McLaurin. I'm going to give Jahan Dotson one last chance. I mean, he's on the field leading the team in routes run. They're moving him all over the field. I think they're trying to make him... They're utilizing him in a way that makes me feel like he's the number one option, but that has just not been the case. This is a plus matchup for the passing game. The volume should be there for the passing game. This is my last chance for Jahan Dotson. If this does not work out here, he's going to be stashed away on my bench, and I'm going to have to wait until I see it. But this will be the last chance for me. He's going to be a start in this particular matchup. Same with Terry McLaurin. On the Eagles side, we don't usually have much to talk about. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, two guys I'm definitely starting this week. Dolphins, Bills. It's time to change the way you think about this Dolphins team. We're 3 weeks in. I've been saying it all season so far. The Dolphins are a legitimate pass defense. They're very good. Under Vic Fangio, they've really have things settled down here defensively against the pass. 10th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. 7th in passing EPA and 84 great coverage grade. So very, very good. Haven't been as good against the run. That's what Vic Fangio's defense is kind of built to do. Be really good against the pass, allow teams to run the football. So that is something to pay attention to with this Dolphins defense. The Bills side of things, really elite unit as they've been healthy. Haven't generated much of a pass rush, which can definitely benefit the Dolphins here and their pass protection, which isn't the best of units. But number one defense in EPA against the pass, the Bills are 4th in fantasy points allowed. It's a really good unit. So definitely something to pay attention to in other matchups. But in this one, I'm definitely going to be playing Tyreek Hill. I'm definitely going to be playing Jalen Waddle. Those are two guys that are going to be coming out of my lineup with the way this Dolphins offense is playing. And then we go to the Bills side. I'm going to be playing Stephon Diggs. What I don't want to do, though, is play Gabe Davis. The Dolphins have done a really good job limiting explosive plays. Teams, I think, on the passes of 20-plus air yards are like 3 for 17, I think. And that's where Davis's bread and butter is deep downfield. Those are going to be tough to come by. So I think Davis is a guy I do want to sit in this particular matchup. I just don't feel very confident in those explosive plays coming, as that's something that he's very reliant upon. Bengals, Titans. The Titans team that we kind of have pretty figured out when it comes to how we've been betting with them and then also how we've been starting and sitting our fantasy relevant players. The Titans are the best run defense in the league, in my opinion. I think they're just as good, if not better, than the Eagles. But the problem is that because that becomes a defense that is going to be thrown on a ton. 29th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers, 25th in EPA against the pass. So a team that you definitely, if you have any wide receivers on your fantasy teams, you're going to be wanting to start against them just because of how high the passing volume is and will be throughout the season. On the Bengals side, we have a defense that's been, the numbers don't tell you they're a great unit, but, I mean, they've had to be on the field quite a bit with how much this Bengals team is struggling offensively. But nothing to be too scared of. They've lost some pieces of their secondary from last season. They're not quite as good of a unit. The numbers do indicate that. Pass rush has been okay. Middle of the road in fantasy points allowed to receivers. EPA isn't great, 22nd against the pass. But definitely a team that you're not too intimidated by, but I do still respect. So where that leads me when it comes to how I'm going to start my receivers against the Bengals, I'll be playing DeAndre Hopkins after sitting him last week. I do think this is a matchup where the Titans will definitely still need him. We still saw him do okay, not terrible, didn't completely bust last week. But when it comes to secondary option like Treylon Burks, I do, again, think this Bengals team is pretty solid against the pass, even if the numbers don't necessarily indicate it. So Burks is a guy I do want to sit. On the Bengals side, I'd start everybody. Like Tyler Boyd in a 12-team league, if you have multiple flex spots, he could be someone to start because the passing volume will be really high. So I think all these receivers will have opportunities. T. Higgins definitely one to bounce back after a really poor week last week with the drops. Here's an opportunity for him to get right and for this entire Bengals passing game to get right. Moving to Ravens, Browns, two teams that have been really good against the run. These are two teams, especially the Browns. The Browns have surprised me with how good they've been against the run. They're the number one team in rushing EPA, but they're also the number one team in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Like they've been very, very good across the board. Second in EPA, a pass rush grade that's one of the best in the league. Now they get a Ravens team that, has underwhelming guys when it comes to Gus Edwards and Justice Hill running the football. They're really banged up because I don't think either of Rashad Bateman or Odell Beckham Jr. are going to play. So that puts a spot here for this Ravens team where they're really undermanned. That's why they're underdogs in this game. On the flip side for the Browns offensively, the Ravens, good run defense, not as good against the pass. They're 9th in EPA against the pass, which is kind of surprising, but 18th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. I think this is a game where the Browns will continue to lean on their pass game. Deshaun Watson looked much improved last week against the Titans. I think it'll be a struggle running the football, so the pass volume should be there for these receivers. So what that leads me to doing is coming off pretty solid weeks for both Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore. I'm definitely willing to go back to them here. This is still a Ravens defense that's pretty banged up. I saw both Odafe, David Ajabo, Marlon Humphrey not practicing. Marcus Williams might play. He was limited in practice. There's a lot lost in this team when it comes to being able to defend the pass. So I'm still confident starting receivers against them. Then the flip side with the Ravens, like I mentioned, I don't think Bateman or Odell Beckham will play. So Nelson Aguilar, Devin Duvernay slotting in more into this offense. Those aren't guys I'm looking to start against this really good Browns defense, but Zay Flowers should see some pretty solid volume here because like I mentioned, the Browns are really good against the run, so finding success offensively might need to come through the pass, even if the Browns have been this good against the pass this year. Next up, the Unlimited Losses Bowl. Mr. Unlimited and the Broncos going to Chicago. What an ugly game. What an ugly look at these two teams when you look at their grades and their marks against some of these major numbers we look at. So two teams that you would expect the opposing offenses to find success offensively. The Broncos in particular. I mean, Vance Joseph has just come in and just set this defense on fire. Like this was one of the best defenses in the league last year, and here they are. They can't stop anybody. So major concern, dead last in EPA against the pass, 42 coverage grade. I think that's second worst in the league, 27th in fantasy points allowed. The Bears, not much better in their own right, 31st in EPA against the pass. Both teams haven't generated much of a pass rush. That should definitely help out both of these offenses when it comes to moving the ball. So these are two defenses you can't be scared of. But what does that necessarily mean for these teams when it comes from the start-sit perspective? We'll get into that. So on the Broncos side, I'm feeling pretty good about Courtland Sutton. He was a guy we talked about quite a bit in the preseason that I was excited about. He seems to be the focal point of this offense, even with Jerry Jeudy back. Jeudy was nursing that hamstring injury. Now he was nursing a knee injury in practice. Him being this banged up, I'm leaning more towards sitting him. I think the Broncos will probably run the ball a little bit. I think Sutton will be that number one guy still. So Sutton will be the guy I start. Jeudy, I'm not ready to play quite yet. Just not enough confidence in this Broncos offense and where they're at right now. On the Bears side, DJ Moore is someone I'm going back to just with the matchup against this Broncos team when it comes to how poor they've been defensively. But any secondary, tertiary options, I just can't trust. Like Justin Fields needs to be throwing the ball for more than 200 yards a game for me to be able to rely on any of these receivers beyond just one guy. And quite frankly, Mooney and Claypool are guys I would expect to be on the wire. I wouldn't even have them on my team. So not guys I'd be starting. Raiders, Chargers. We've got a Chargers team that looks a little different offensively. How are we going to attack that? Well, the Raiders have been a team that haven't been great against the pass or just across the board defensively. The pass rush hasn't been there. Missing Chandler Jones, they're not looking like the same kind of unit when it comes to rushing the passer. 28th in EPA against the pass, 22nd in fantasy points allowed to receivers, so not a unit to be scared of. The Chargers, on the other hand, we know what they're capable of defensively. That's given up a ton of points. 32nd, dead last in fantasy points allowed, 2 wide receivers, 26th in EPA against the pass, so haven't been good. Coverage unit's just been terrible. J.C. Jackson telling me he's shocked he was a healthy and active last week. I mean, you got to do your job and cover somebody if you want to play. So this team has been pretty brutal. Definitely an opportunity for the Raiders receivers to have a great day. So with that, we'll definitely be starting Devontae Adams. And then Jacoby Myers, like volume has been great. He's looking like one of the steals of like the waiver wire or late draft if you took him, because he's getting great volume. I know there could be the potential of no Jimmy Garoppolo this week and see a Brian Hoyer start. I think you can still play both of these guys because, like I mentioned, the Chargers have not been that intimidating of a pass defense, and I expect the Chargers to be leading in this game. I do want to play Keenan Allen, of course. Josh Palmer is someone that's more like wide receiver 4 territory for me, just because I don't know how high the pass volume will be for the Chargers. But Quentin Johnston's definitely someone, if you add it off the wire, I would not start this week. You got to wait and see with Johnston to see how much his role grows, because it wasn't basically nothing the first few weeks of the season. Palmer will definitely be the number 2 option for right now. So I don't see a high ceiling this week for Palmer, but he could give you a decent floor is basically where I'm at. So there is still decent reason to start him. Cardinals, 49ers. This Cardinals team coming off a big win over the Cowboys last week. The unit is pretty respectable. Nothing that we haven't read for their defense. Middle of the road in most of the major categories. Just be about for the 49ers, a massive favorite in this game, 14-point favorites. So for how long and how often are they throwing the football? We saw them throw it a decent amount against last week against the Giants when they were massive favorites. So I still have some confidence enough to go around for this receiving game. My question is, what's the deal with Deebo Samuel? I'm recording this Friday morning. He wasn't practicing yesterday, I believe, or was that Wednesday? So that could be something to pay attention to. The Niners, though, elite pass defense. They just keep everything in front of them. Like, they don't give up any explosive plays. So for this Cardinals team, that's going to be really tough. We got a defense that got, I think, the best pass rush grade in the league, 6th in fantasy points allowed, 5th in passing EPA. This is one of the best units across the board defensively. So because of that, I'm definitely going to be sitting guys like Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, Michael Wilson. None of these guys in my mind are players that you want to go to in a really, really tough matchup, even if we get a game script where they can throw it a ton. Moving the ball is just incredibly difficult. And this Niners team is going to be playing really slow, limiting the amount of plays in this game, just trying to get through this game, get out of Dodge with a W here. So I'm not really looking to play any of these guys. I just don't see a lot of upside. Like, you look at last week, and a guy like Paris Campbell had like 6-7 receptions for like 23 yards. So being able to pick up yards after the catch is so difficult the way this defense is schemed up for the 49ers. On the other side, like I have here, I know I have Deebo Samuel as a sit. I'm skeptical if he plays, and if he does, why would they utilize him in a major way if he's banged up in a game where they're a massive, massive favorite at home too? So, like, I know the the Cardinals ultimately won that game last week. I don't know how replicable that'll be on the road at the Niners. So Brandon Ayuk is someone I think you could play because he'll be out there. I think he'll be the beneficiary of a relatively soft matchup here against this Cardinals defense. But Deebo, though, little concerned about the volume, and he's a guy that lives more in those intermediate areas of the field when Ayuk is in the lineup. Last one before we get to our primetime games, Patriots, Cowboys. The Cowboys coming off again that tough loss to the Cardinals last week. Definitely some motivation to get back on track. The passing offense was not good. Patriots defense, though, very solid, 10th in EPA, 12th in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Pass rush hasn't quite been there quite yet this year, which could be a problem against a really good Cowboys offensive line. Cowboys, though, defensively, still a good unit. 3rd in EPA against the pass, 88.3 coverage grade, great pass rush. Teams are typically, the Giants trailing week 2. Who was it? Who they have in week 2? I'm blanking on who they had in week 2. Regardless, both those teams were down big in those games. So teams are going to have to throw the ball against them to kind of get back into games, but still a really good unit, even with Gilmore out. I know they struggled a little bit. That could be something to pay attention to moving forward, but not necessarily something I'm looking at quite yet. So what I'll be doing here with the Patriots, really tough matchup, I think. None of these guys are really reliable, even in like mediocre matchups, and now we get one that's really tough. All these guys are sits for me. I could see the Patriots here being, I think they'll be pretty balanced offensively. We won't see quite the passing volume we've seen in recent weeks because they're getting a defense that isn't quite as good against the run as some of the others they've faced. On the Cowboys side, I do have a lot of respect for the Patriots defense when it comes to how they defend the pass and the run across the board. Michael Gallup seems to more be that number 2 for the Cowboys that we've seen the first few weeks, but nothing I'm willing to like dive in on either one of these guys because it could very easily be the veteran Brandon Cooks kind of standing out the next week. So I'm going to wait and get a little bit more data on these two guys before I really consider starting either one of them. So that just leaves CeeDee Lamb in this game as really the only guy I'm looking to start. What a doozy we have here. Going to be a ton of fun, I'm sure. Chiefs, Jets. Tired of having to see the Jets and the Giants in primetime games or any important game, really. The Jets offensively struggling a ton. The Chiefs have actually been really good defensively. 8th in fantasy points allowed to receivers. The Jets could be trailing big time in this game. They're going to have to throw the ball. I'm sure the Chiefs handle business here. I don't see much of a path for the Jets with Zach Wilson at quarterback winning this football game. On the Chiefs side, very tough matchup for their passing offense. Mahomes will definitely make things happen. They'll still be able to move the ball. I definitely see Travis Kelce being more of that relied upon target when you play such a high quality defense. The Jets are 2nd in fantasy points allowed, 2 wide receivers on the season. And again, if the Jets are trailing by a bunch, the Chiefs will not need to throw the football at quite the rate that they typically do. We'll probably run the ball a little bit more with Isaiah Pacheco, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. So that's going to take away from the production from these receivers too. So for that reason, definitely be sitting all of these guys. Don't feel confident in Sky Moore on a week-to-week basis. A guy like Marquez Valdes-Scantling as well, not someone I'm confident in playing. Again, he's relying on some deep plays. I don't think those will happen. Kadarius Toney, not on the field nearly enough. Rashee Rice is that stash guy for me that I'm potentially going to get back, hopefully have a chance to get in my lineups, and he kind of breaks out as potentially the number 1 receiver in this offense. Not willing to take that chance, though, against the Jets. Jets offensively, Garrett Wilson is still a guy I'm going to start because game script is so good. The passing volume should be solid. I know Zach Wilson is just a complete and utter bum, but I do trust Wilson from that talent standpoint to demand the targets and opportunity because he's going to give this team the best chance to stay in this game and make plays. So I'm still going to go to him in this matchup. The only time I'm not going to him, it would be like really tough passing matchups, like a Cowboys game, potentially, or a Niners game. But in this one, I'm still not thinking that the Chiefs are as good as these fantasy numbers indicate. Monday night, we're getting those Giants again. Now, this isn't a game where I think we're going to be really, really bored and not want to be watching this game because the Giants are being blown out. I do think this should be a competitive matchup and a game that's pretty exciting. Giants, though, defensively, haven't been great against the pass, 30th in EPA, coverage grade of 52.8. A defense across the board that there's just nothing to be scared of right now. They've been brutal against the run, brutal against the pass. Had some teams that have really exposed them in both of those. Even the Cardinals were able to move the ball through the air. Seahawks, they've been really solid against the run. Last year, that was a huge problem. This year, they figured it out. Teams have been throwing the ball a little bit more against them and found some success. 30th in fantasy points allowed, the Seahawks are. 27th in pass EPA. Coverage grade is just not good enough. Not going to cut it. So the Giants should have some success moving the ball through the air. With that in mind, Darius Slayton, I think, is a solid start. If this is a guy on Monday night that maybe you're not willing to, you're going to find everything out injury-wise. He might be a guy that you have in your bench that you might slot in if this was like Thursday night. You didn't want to take the risk of guys not playing. But by Monday, you're going to know if injury news on a lot of players. So you might not be confident starting Darius Slayton. But honestly, the Giants, without Saquon Barkley, I expect another week. They'll have to lean on Daniel Jones in his arm. So I do think Slayton will get some pretty good volume and find some success. He's one of the most underrated fantasy players in my mind. Can definitely be a solid start in good matchups. And this is one of them. Isaiah Hodgins, though, not enough here to go around for him from what I've seen so far. They're really spreading the ball around. I think Wan'Dale Robinson's a great stash, and I think someone they want to be running the right side of the slot over Paris Campbell, but too much of a split so far. He's not getting the field quite enough yet, but definitely a great stash. Seahawks side of things, both DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett are good starts in a plus matchup. Guys are pretty much weekly starting. JSN, though, not getting on the field enough. His ADOT is like 2.6 yards. I put this out on the YouTube Shorts channel. Like, there's just... The numbers are ugly for him. He's not getting the field enough. His ADOT is far too low, so that means he's got to be a monster after the catch and super productive with his opportunities. And if he's getting targets like 3 yards down the field, you're not going to be productive very often unless you're one of the best tackle-breaking after-the-catch players in the league. And Jigba is a great talent. It just isn't there quite yet. Okay, we went through every single matchup for week 4 of the fantasy football season, helping you set your lineups at the wide receiver position. Hopefully, helped you out here, helped you make some decisions for your lineups this week. Again, we're live on the Stunt, 4 to 5 Eastern, every single week on Fridays. So make sure you go download the app. The link is down below in the description. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.